Ever wonder what it was really like to live in the Middle Ages? Forget the knights in shining armor and the grand castles for a moment. Let's talk about the people who made up 90% of the population, the peasants. Their lives were a world away from the fairy tales, filled with back-breaking labor, constant uncertainty, and a surprising amount of resilience. So, grab a seat, because we're about to journey back in time to uncover the raw, unfiltered reality of being a medieval peasant. Let's start from the very beginning. Childhood. A medieval peasant's childhood was short, if they were lucky enough to have one at all. Infant mortality was incredibly high. Disease, malnutrition, and poor sanitation meant that nearly half of all children wouldn't live to see their 10th birthday. For those who did survive, life was not about play, it was about preparation. From as young as 5 or 6, children were expected to contribute. Little hands would be tasked with scaring birds from the fields, gathering firewood, fetching water, or watching over younger siblings. There was no formal education. Reading and writing were skills for the clergy and the nobility. A peasant child's classroom was the field, and their lessons were in farming, animal husbandry, and survival. By their early teens, they were considered adults, fully integrated into the grueling work cycle that would define the rest of their lives. Marriage often happened young, sealing alliances between families and creating new household units ready to work the land. The rhythm of a peasant's life was dictated by the sun and the seasons. Their workday began at dawn and ended at dusk. From spring planting to the autumn harvest, the fields were their entire world. This wasn't just a job, it was a constant struggle for survival. The main tool was the heavy plow, often pulled by a team of oxen. Imagine wrestling that through dense, heavy soil all day, every day. Men typically handled the plowing and sowing, while women were responsible for a staggering amount of other tasks. They tended the vegetable garden, milked the cows, made cheese and butter, brewed ale, which was safer to drink than water-spun wool, and weaved cloth to make the family's clothes. And on top of all that, they were expected to help in the fields during peak times like the harvest. Harvest was the most intense time of the year. The entire community, from the youngest to the oldest, would work from sunrise to sunset, racing against the weather to bring in the crops. They used simple tools like sickles and scythes. The work was relentless and exhausting. A failed harvest didn't just mean a bad year. It could mean starvation, and even after all that hard work, a significant portion of what they grew didn't belong to them. They were bound to the land owned by a lord, a knight, a baron, or a monastery. In exchange for a small strip of land to farm for themselves, they had to work the lord's land, the domain. For free, for several days a week, this was known as labor service. On top of the labor service, peasants had to pay rent and taxes. This wasn't usually in coin, which was rare, but in kind. A portion of their grain, a few chickens, a dozen eggs, everything was tallied. There were taxes for using the lord's mill to grind your grain, his oven to bake your bread, and his press to make your cider. There was a tax when you got married and a tax when you died. The church also demanded its share, a tithe, which was typically 10% of their annual produce. After the lord and the church took their cuts, the peasant family was left with just enough to hopefully survive the winter and have seed for the next planting season. It was a system designed to keep them tied to the land and in a state of perpetual poverty. So, what did they eat with the little they had left? Their diet was simple and monotonous. The staple food was bread, but not the light, fluffy loaf we know today. It was a dark, dense, heavy bread made from rye or barley, often called pottage bread. The centerpiece of most meals was a thick stew, also called pottage, that simmered over the fire all day. Whatever vegetables were available from their small garden cabbage, onions, peas, beans would be thrown in. A bit of bacon or salted meat might be added for flavor if they were lucky, but meat was a rare luxury. Foraging was essential. They gathered nuts, berries, and mushrooms from the woods, but even this was risky. Hunting in the Lord's forest was strictly forbidden, an act of poaching punishable by severe mutilation or even death. Let's step inside a peasant's home. The word house is a generous term. Most lived in 1 or 2 room huts, often called cruck houses, with walls made of wattle and daba, mixture of woven sticks, mud, straw, and animal dung. The roof was thatched with straw or reeds, which leaked and needed constant repair. There was no floor, just packed earth. A fire pit in the center of the room provided warmth and a place to cook. But with no chimney, the single room was constantly filled with smoke. This smoke helped to cure meats hanging from the rafters and kill some of the bugs, but it also caused chronic respiratory problems. There was no privacy. The entire family, parents, children, and maybe even grandparents slept, ate, and lived in that one smoky room. And they weren't alone. During the cold winter months, to prevent them from freezing or being stolen, valuable livestock like a cow or a few chickens would be brought inside to share the space. As you can imagine, the smell and the sanitation were appalling. Fleas, lice, and rats were constant companions. Sickness spread quickly in these cramped, unhygienic conditions. Life was often a battle against infection and disease, with no access to medicine beyond herbal remedies. Socially, peasants were at the absolute bottom of the feudal pyramid. They were seen as property of the land, not much different from the livestock. There were different statuses. Some were freemen who had more rights and could sometimes leave the manor. But the vast majority were serfs or villains. Serfs were legally bound to the land. They couldn't leave the manor, marry, or even sell an ox without the lord's permission. Their lives were not their own. They had no legal recourse against their lord. If a lord was cruel or unjust, there was very little they could do. Justice was dispensed at the manor court, presided over by the lord or his steward. Fines were a common punishment, further depleting a family's meager resources. Despite this bleak picture, it's important to remember that these were real people with joys and sorrows, not just faceless laborers. Village life revolved around the church and the changing seasons. Religious festivals and holy days were eagerly anticipated breaks from the endless work. Christmas, Easter, and Midsummer were times for celebration. People would gather to feast on whatever extra food they had, drink ale, play music, dance, and play rough sports. These moments of community and celebration were vital. A brief but brilliant flash of light in an otherwise gray existence. They told stories, sang songs, and found comfort in their shared faith and traditions. They built communities that supported each other through hardship, sharing tools and helping a neighbor whose ox had died. So, was there any hope for escape? For most, no. A peasant was born a peasant and would die a peasant. However, there were a few narrow paths out. A boy could join the church, though this was more common for slightly better-off peasant families. In rare cases, a peasant could show exceptional bravery in battle and be granted freedom or even a small piece of land. The rise of towns and cities also offered a glimmer of hope. A serf who managed to escape to a town and lived there for a year and a day without being caught could be granted their freedom. But this was a dangerous gamble, and life in the crowded, unsanitary medieval towns was not necessarily an improvement. The biggest change came with the Black Death in the mid-14th century. The plague wiped out a huge portion of the population, leading to a massive labor shortage. Suddenly, peasants were in demand. They could negotiate for better wages, lower rents, and more freedoms. This event dramatically weakened the old feudal system and planted the seeds for the end of serfdom in many parts of Europe. The life of a medieval peasant was undeniably harsh, a constant grind of labor, poverty, and obligation. It was a world away from our modern lives, defined by a struggle for the most basic necessities. Yet, it was also a life of community, faith, and incredible resilience. These were the people whose sweat and toil built the foundations of the world we live in today. Their story is a powerful reminder of how far we've come. Thanks for watching. If you found this journey into the past interesting, please hit the like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. See you next time.